Hi everyone, my name's Gerald. So I'm the proud owner of this 2012 Nissan GTR that you see right here. And one thing that you should know is if you're considering purchasing a GTR, and you probably already know this if you already own one, but the GTR brakes can be relatively expensive to replace, especially if you go to a Nissan GTR dealer. So about 8 years ago, I had about 50,000 miles on my GTR and I took it in to get serviced. And they were like, oh, you really need to get the brakes replaced. So I was like, well, how much is it gonna cost? And they were like, well, to replace the pads and also to replace the rotors, it's gonna be about $6,000. I was like, oh my goodness. So anyway, I took it to a different shop and they just replaced the pads. But now I have about 125,000 miles on my GTR. So yeah, it's probably time for me to get the rotors and the pads actually replaced. But how do you really know when it's time to replace the pads and replace the motors on your GTR? So today we're going to try to figure that out together. And so I've got my GTR lifted and I'm going to take the wheels off and then we're going to go ahead and look at the rotors and also the pads. So if you do plan on doing any work on your GTR, you should know that that front lip is really low. So yeah, I don't have a lift or anything like really expensive. I was watching these videos by JD Archer. Yeah, and he basically just uses the lumber method. So he has two big pieces of lumber and basically just drives over the top of it. And then I have this is actually a low profile jack right here. And so I got this from Harbor Freight. It was like 160 bucks. And yeah, it's a 3-ton jack, so it lifts the GTR real easily. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and remove the wheels and the tires just to see, to get a little better look at what our rotor looks like and also the brake pads. Okay, so I got the wheel, a tire off. So here's our rotor. So one of the things that you can do on the GTR, so the GTR has these vented drilled holes for, I guess for the rotor to dissipate heat. If the rotor has gotten extremely hot, a lot of times you'll see some cracks in the rotor, some hairline cracks, and especially right by the holes. And so I got some light on here, and so I'm gonna do a close-up with my camera and to let you see that. And I really don't see any sort of cracks in my vent holes, my drill holes at all. And also this lip. So there's a little bit of a lip right here, I can feel it. And so sometimes that can also mean that the rotor is kind of warped because there's a little bit of a lip there. But let me go ahead and take a close-up of it so you can check it out. And then we're actually going to try to measure the rotor. All right, so we're doing a little close-up view of the vent holes. And yeah, as I mentioned, I'm really not seeing any sort of sign of cracking in the rotor at all. I'm seeing some scoring, but I'm not sure if that's excessive or not. But yeah, there's a really good look at the rotor. And so yeah, for those of you that are brake experts out there, if you see something that you notice that would tell you that that rotor needs to be replaced, that sure would be great to hear from you guys. All right, we're gonna go ahead and measure the rotor. So I've got this nice digital caliper. I'm gonna go ahead and zero it out, so it's at 0. And I'm going to go ahead and measure the width of the rotors. New on the 2012, its thickness is 32.8 millimeters, and the minimum thickness that you want is 30.8 millimeters, so it can lose up to 2 millimeters. So let's go ahead and measure this. Okay, and it's showing 31.8 millimeters. Now, they say because of the fact that there's sometimes a lip on here that you actually shouldn't measure the rotors that way. What you should actually do, I'm going to go ahead and write down that 31.8 just to see if there's a difference. They say what you're supposed to do is like use some coins. And so I've got coins here, so we'll measure those. Okay. So my coins are 3.7 millimeters. So I'll write that down. And now I'm going to measure the rotors with the coins, and then I'll subtract that 3.7 millimeters from the measurement that I get. Okay, so I got 34.7 on this one. So I take the 34.7 and I take 3.7 away from that, which is pretty easy math. So that's 31 millimeters. So yeah, so without those coins, I was at 31.8. With the coins, I was at 31. So definitely having the coins helps you make the measurement a little more accurate. And my minimum thickness is really 30.8 millimeters. So I'm 0.2 still good. So that, that probably means that I probably should replace the rotors. But let's go ahead and measure the brake pads next. All right, so I'm going to attempt to measure my brake pad. And so it's this portion of it right here with this thing called a compass. And so basically I'm going to push this kind of right up against the brake pad and then basically just kind of set it so it's just right to the very end. And so I think that's about it. And then if I am to then measure this, that shows 11.3. Yeah, I'm not just trusting this because I'm using kind of a small pencil. The other method of doing this would be, to get some sort of a tape measure. You could also use just like coins and kind of put them in there and use those to try to measure. And you can see I've got a little more room. It's hard to tell, you can't really see in there, but I've got probably at least one more nickel's worth of material left. So let me grab one more nickel. Yeah, all right, so I got 4 nickels now. And let me put that in there. And that, yeah, there's pretty much no room right there, so that's perfect. So it looks like my brake pad thickness is right about 4 nickels. So now let me measure my nickels. And you don't need one of these to measure nickels because nickels is kind of a standard measurement. But my nickels come to 7.4. So I started off with 11.1 and I have 4.5 as the limit and I'm at 7.4. Now, if you don't have the necessary tools or maybe you just don't feel like having to deal with this, whenever you take it in for an oil change at your Nissan dealer, whoever does your work, they can relatively easily, they have better tools than I have, and they can really quickly check the measurement and the thickness of your rotors as well as your brake pads. And so yeah, just whenever you're having that work done, just go ahead and get that measurement so at least you know kind of where you are as far as brakes go. So let's just assume that we need to replace the brakes on our GTR. I called my GTR dealership this morning and I just wanted to know how much it would cost to replace the rotors and the pads on both the fronts and the rear. And it was going to be $8,500 to do so. That's just absolutely crazy. So I did some research and there's lots of cheaper options out there. And it all sort of depends on the kind of driving that you do. If you're just basically going to be on the street, there's lots of cheaper options. But let's say if you are have a lot of extra horsepower and you do a lot of fast driving and a lot of high speed braking where you need, really absolutely phenomenal brakes, then you're going to have to pay a little bit more. Or let's say that you track it all the time. You're going to need better quality brakes. And so it all depends on kind of the driving that you do, on really the kind of brakes that you need to select. One of the things I do recommend though is if you're replacing the rotors, I would just go ahead and get the brake pads replaced at the same time. The brake pads aren't all that expensive compared to the rotors, and you really want to start fresh if you're starting off with brand new rotors. So don't cheap out and try to use the same existing brake pads. So for your basic street setup, it's really hard to go wrong with the Speed by Design brake kit. You get brand new rotors, you get brand new pads, only cost about $1,350. It's probably going to last you longer than the OEM GTR brakes, and it's definitely going to be quieter. So another option for the street and maybe a little bit of track use is the DBA rotors as well as the Hawk HPS pads. These are really popular. When I did research on the GTR forums, very popular on the forums, and I found them for about $2,700, and it's still going to cost you a lot less than buying from the Nissan dealership. So for those of you that occasionally track, but primarily use the GTR on the street. One of the options is swapping out the Speed by Design brake pads and instead using the Pagid PAGID RS29 brake pads. When I was doing research, I looked at Lichner Performance, and they recommend these brake pads, and also Speed by Design is a reseller for these pads. And so, yeah, I think they're really a pretty good deal. You can get the Speed by Design rotors and the Pagid brake pads for only $2,200. So that's a pretty good option. So for those GT owners that spend a lot of time on the track, a very popular option on the GTR forums are the J-Hook rotors by AP Racing, as well as the Endless MX72 pads. And they're actually pretty expensive though, so I found them for like $5,500, but they should last a lot longer and be a lot better for the track. So regardless of which brake package you decide to get, you're either going to have to install them yourself or find a shop that's going to install them for you. I'd recommend that you try to find a good performance shop that hopefully works on GTRs that should be very familiar with the GTR brake setup as well as these products. So I called around locally here in Las Vegas to get some prices for installing basically the Speed by Design GTR brake kit, and I called this company called Samurai Motors. They were recommended by some GTR owners here in Las Vegas, and they said that they would actually do the install for $420, which I thought was really reasonable. So I did talk to Chris Riggs from Speed by Design just to get his feelings on how long it would take to install the brake package, as well as what would be a reasonable cost for a local shop. And he said for a competent tech, it would probably take between 4 and 6 hours to install his brake kit. So it kind of depends on your local labor market on how much a good tech, what they charge for. So let's say it would be $150, and let's say it would take you 5 hours. So, you know, I probably wouldn't pay more than about $750 to get the brake kit installed. If you do plan on installing the brake kit yourself, and maybe you haven't done this on a GTR yet, I'd recommend that you look at JD Archer's. He has a 2-part video series on installing the Speed by Design kit, and that will probably be very helpful. So that's it. In my next video, I hope to interview Chris Riggs of Speed by Design. Hopefully I'll spend some time talking specifically about his brake package, as well as other things that his company offers and what's next on the horizon for his company. If you got some value from this video, please like it and also consider subscribing to my channel. And I hope to see you in the next one again very soon.
I've seen a lot of change, been through a lot of pain. Some things are not the same as they were a year ago, but all will be okay. I move on each and every day. The past is where it stays, way back a year ago.